On today's show, the NBA trade deadline is only 2 weeks away, and that leads to all kinds of questions about the Atlanta Hawks. We'll answer those questions and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 2149 of the Locked On Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday evening into Friday here late in the month of January. It's our 4th episode of the week in this same podcast feed, including a breakdown of a really good road win for the Hawks on Wednesday evening. So if you missed that, catch up, subscribe, and I appreciate you being here as always. Today, we'll be diving into all kinds of questions from you, the listeners and viewers of this podcast, in our mailbag. And the big kind of lead topic is that the deadline for trades in the NBA is coming up in 2 weeks. I'm recording this podcast on Thursday evening. The deadline is 2 weeks from today, Thursday, February the 5th. And while there isn't a ton going on around the Atlanta Hawks right now in comparison to some other teams that are kind of embroiled in more active trade rumors, there is a lot to discuss, and it's a good round number to kind of lead up into the deadline at this point in time. Of course, there's games every other day or so, but in the meantime, in between games for the Hawks, it's worth noting that the Hawks actually been involved in a lot of trade stuff already. In fact, there have been only 2 trades in the NBA, 2 fully consummated official trades over the last 5 months. That's a long time, dating back to August, basically. And the Hawks were involved in both of those 2 trades. The first one was that the final trade of the offseason for the entire NBA was the Hawks sending Kobe Buffkin, old friend, to Brooklyn in mid-September. Then nothing happened in the league trade-wise until the Hawks made the, of course, now recognizable Trae Young trade, sending him to Washington in exchange for McCollum and Corey Kispert. So it would be disingenuous to suggest that the Hawks are sitting on their hands. I know that some fans just want action all the time. I see almost every day someone saying, like, why won't Aussie do anything? The Hawks have been as active as anybody around the league when it comes to trades. In fact, more active over the last 5 months. And even then, that's by definition, they've been the most active team in the league in trades. But before that, they had a very busy offseason. Recall, this is the team that signed the best free agent to change teams this summer in Alexander Walker. They trade for Porzingis. They make the Grand Slam Pelicans trade on draft night. It's been a very busy time, even though it's kind of slower right now post Trae Young trade. But look, some of the stuff I've been asked about has kind of quieted down around the league. Some of the reporting around the Hawks has quieted down around the league. It certainly can ramp back up, and it might. I think if I was to guess, there'll be at least a rumor at some point between now and 2 weeks from now. But for example, the Anthony Davis buzz was probably the loudest post Trae Young topic around the Hawks when it comes to trade stuff. That buzz has definitely quieted down a lot. I'd say across the league, it's pretty minimal right now with his contract and his injury. I know there's been some Rich Paul buzz about his team wanting him out of Dallas, but I continue to be told, and I was told this today by a good source, that it's very unlikely that the Hawks would trade for AD in the next 2 weeks. No one is saying it's 0% chance, I guess, but I would say, again, I was told it's very unlikely today. Adding to that, Jake Fisher over at the Steinline wrote today that the Hawks are one of the teams that is signaling now that they are no longer involved in trade talks with significant ones with the Mavs about Anthony Davis. So that one, I'm not saying to cross it off, but it's not the burning fire that it might have been. And even then, I've always said this on the podcast, the interest was overstated from what I was told behind the scenes, but it's even lower now, it seems like, than it was even at its apex a couple weeks ago. There is, of course, some Giannis smoke kicking up, not always about the Hawks, but related to the Hawks, and that the Hawks would love for Milwaukee to trade Giannis because they would lose a lot more games. And for draft reasons, that would help the Hawks considerably because they have the better of the Pelicans and the Bucks draft pick. And look, the Hawks are at least a potential suitor for Giannis. For example, Zach Lowe on TV the other night mentioned the Hawks, Warriors, Lakers, Heat, and Knicks as teams that are at least considering holding onto their assets for potential pursuits of Giannis in the future. That's not surprising. The Hawks have the kind of package that could entice Milwaukee. I don't know if they're like loading up only for that, but certainly they would be a team to monitor. A team, not the team, but a team to monitor if Giannis got a little bit looser. Brian Windhorst today actually said that it's getting more likely by the hour. That's a direct quote from Wendy. The Giannis could be moved, but also said basically around the league, the buzz is with Giannis is basically like he doesn't want to be the bad guy and actually ask for a trade. And the team, they don't want to trade him without his consent for, history reasons. He's been awesome there. They won a title, all that stuff. So the Bucks have a path to tank in season if they were to trade Giannis, which again would help the Hawks considerably. And they have a reason to do that, and that they have, it's not their own pick all the way, but it's swapped with New Orleans' pick. So New Orleans is a bad team too. All that said, a name to monitor, but nothing to be a 5-alarm fire about right now. So all that said, the big name stuff is not boiling over as of right now. But I want to reset a little bit right now and just say that as I would say disappointing as the season's been for the Hawks from a win-loss standpoint here in late January, the realistic goals coming into the season are still attainable. Are they as likely to be attained? No. But, and notice I use the word realistic in there. I'm not saying that they have a likely chance to make the finals, but the realistic goals are still kind of in front of them if they could figure out what's going on. And again, that win last night was very helpful in this pursuit. For as bad as it's been at times, as of right now, they are still in the play-in, even though it's not gone well. And crucially, they're 4 games out of the 6th seed, which is a better, the non-play-in where they want to be. And wildly, they're only 6 games out of the 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. So if the Hawks were to rattle off a 10-2 kind of run at some point, they'll be right back in the mix for where they want to be. That's not easy to do, keep that in mind, but it's at least conceivable for a team that still has some pretty decent talent. And I don't want to overstate this, but they have one of the easiest schedules remaining, which I've talked about a lot on the podcast. I won't repeat all of that. But by winning percentage, they are, I think, top 3 in the league in easy schedules remaining. They have the fewest remaining road games in the entire NBA. And I know there's a joke to be made about how the Hawks have been bad at home this year. I get that. You still want to be at home more than on the road. I know what the numbers are this year. I promise I understand. Ask anyone in the league, you'd rather be at home than on the road. And the Hawks already have the most road games in the past and the least in the future. They also have the least amount of rest disadvantages the rest of the season, schedule-wise. So that doesn't ensure anything whatsoever. But if you want to be optimistic, there is stuff available to you to find that optimism about the season. So, and the first of many questions I'll answer on this podcast today, 2 of them are kind of related to this topic of the deadline and what's going to be happening. So I'll put them together in one to some degree. One came from Bullwith in the Everydayer Club Discord of this podcast, who asks, are there any realistic expectations of this team making a move during the season, which basically means the next 2 weeks? And then he adds that it feels like Ansi is content to let the season go to have a room under the cap in the summer for any kind of major move. Then Dr. Sam on Twitter asks, do you think the Hawks will operate as an over-the-cap team or under-the-cap team next season if they if they operate under the cap, then how much flexibility do they actually generate with the Trae Young trade? So all that said is basically like, what's going on with the money situation, and will the Hawks do something in the near future? So the first question about the what to expect before the deadline, I would say generally the Hawks could still make a trade. Now, no duh. I am on record for years and years and years as saying, and I think this is just true, that making trades is harder than fans want it to be. I don't mean that it's impossible, but there are so many more discussions between teams that happen than the trades that actually get done. A lot of things have to go, especially in the NBA where cap stuff and salary matching. In baseball, you can call up and say, you can trade Aaron Judge of the top side for one prospect if you want to, and you just call it in. It's that easy. In basketball, you got to match salary. It has to be approved by the league, all those things. So they could make a trade. They could make 2 trades. From what I understand at this point in time, this is also a situation where they do not feel like they have to make a deal. So there are teams in the league that are have urgency for whatever reason, whether it's to trade a certain player, whether it's to get under the luxury tax, different things for different teams. The Hawks don't have that urgency right now to make a trade in the next 2 weeks. Now, about the Trae Young trade, I talked about the factors about this post Trae Young trade. This is still a team that, for me, is still prioritizing the future over the present. Now, the present still matters. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but for example, they'd rather have expiring deals like the ones for Porzingis or Kennard or McCollum expire than to take on money that they actually don't want. So yes, it would be fairly easy if they wanted to just make a trade of some kind to trade one of the expiring contracts to take somebody back. That's not hard to do. But do you want that salary coming back? That's a question. I think Ansi's been pretty clear about prioritizing the flexibility with the cap sheet. And that does not mean that they only want cap space. That's a misconception that I always hear about. Like people want cap. It's not all about cap space. In fact, cap space can be overrated in a lot of ways. Flexibility has as much to do with having good players on good contracts, being able to navigate under the tax, not being limited, being able to do 2-for-1 trades, like all these different things that you can do with flexibility that are not related to directly having cap space. So what I would say about Ansi and the front office is that they're going to be very active on the phones. Like they are not shy. They're making a lot of calls about a lot of different things and examining ways to make the team better short term, but especially long term. They're not going to make a deal, I don't think, barring ownership injecting themselves into the process, that would be super short term focused. Like trading for a rental and trading real stuff in the future would be a bad idea for where they are right now. But if you can make a trade that helps you in the short term and the long term, that makes a lot of sense. But Ansi is very process oriented. He's not going to do a trade just to do a trade. So if nothing goes down over the next 2 weeks, that is not a surprise to me. Because again, they've already made a giant trade. Like 3 weeks ago, they made a giant trade. Now, that doesn't change anything else. If you didn't like that trade, I didn't love it. I gave it a C- on this podcast. It is what it is. But they have been active. And there's no reason to believe that they won't be active in the future. But Ansi is not going to do a deal that he doesn't think is going to help the team long term. I don't think. And yes, you have 3 expiring contracts. You have KP, you have McCollum, you have Kennard. Those can be ripe to be moved. But for example, McCollum cannot be aggregated. It has to be only him in a trade. That makes it harder. Porzingis, I know this is actually a pet peeve of mine. Hawks fans that really, really don't like KP, but also believe he can be traded for like awesome stuff back. One reason why he may not have a lot of trade value is that he doesn't play very much. So like the Hawks can trade him, sure. But like you're not going to get some massive haul for him when he's not been playing. That matters. And then Kennard is more like filler. I like Kennard. I think that's a fine contract. But like teams are not going to be banging down your door to trade for Luke Kennard. So it's not as easy as you might think it is. I'll just end this first segment by saying they could make a trade. They can make 2 trades. They can make no trades. None of that will surprise me. But I am very confident. In fact, I know this for a fact that Ansi's not going to just hang the phone up. They're going to be very active. There are certain players and assets, like I've said before, Jalen Johnson and the Pelicans-Bucks pick are not being traded. I will fall out of my chair if either are traded. The only way that either of those things could be on the table ever this in the next 2 weeks is maybe if Giannis came available. And even then, I think they probably wouldn't trade those things for Giannis. But short of Giannis, there's nothing that I could possibly see those guys being traded for, that player and that asset. I think Nikhil is very safe. Like up and down the roster, there are degrees of available, but Ansi's not precious about stuff. If he thinks he's going to make the team better, he'll do it. And I see this all the time. But if the Hawks are too quiet for your tastes, then the rest of the league has been a lot quieter because the last 2 trades the Hawks have made are the last 2 trades that happened in the NBA. All right, in a second, I'll answer that question about the salary cap stuff in a second, which definitely involves the next couple of weeks with the trade deadline stuff. Plus, later on in the podcast, a brief look at the Hawks-Suns game on Friday. Actually, a very interesting matchup on Friday night. All that and more coming up in just one moment. Tax season does not have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert from start to finish without the stress or the guesswork. Instead of spending hours on your taxes trying to figure out online forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect with them online. They handle everything from W-2s, self-employed forms, and more, and work to get you every single deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get the updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver, and it gives you real peace of mind knowing that an expert is handling it for you. For a limited time, also have your taxes done by local TurboTax expert for just $150, all in, if a TurboTax tax expert did not file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life with TurboTax. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. All right, thank you as always. Make Locked On Hawks your first listen each and every day. If you ever want to go ad-free, you can do so now by joining the Everydayer Club and by going to lockedonhawks.supercast.com to learn more. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of kind of money/salary cap, luxury tax, not concerns, but like questions, uncertainty. And this stuff really matters in the NBA world, which is why I want to answer what Dr. Sam asked earlier about like the flexibility aspect of the money stuff. So right now, the Hawks are roughly $7 million under the luxury tax for this current season that we are in right now. I don't think the Hawks are going to go over the tax this season for almost any reason. If they were 31-15 right now, maybe Ansi could have talked Tony into spending some more money and going into the tax. But when they're under 500 like they are right now, I would be shocked if they went over the tax this season now. Now, on the bright side, there is some wiggle room to take on some money in the right trade. So, like, there are some teams in the league right now, like the Knicks, for example, is one of these teams that, like, almost can't take on any money in a trade. It's, like, hard to navigate. Like, it really limits your options in a trade. The Hawks have the chance to take on money if they need to. Like, there's flexibility in that, and that's part of why they wanted to be a little bit closer, a little bit lower in their number in season. Now, next year, importantly, the 26-27 season, the Hawks currently have 9 players under contract for about $121.8 million. That includes nothing for KP or McCollum or Kennard. Those guys are expiring contracts. Now, they would have cap holds, but right now they're not signed to any sort of deal for next year. Now, the Hawks have that pick from the Pelicans or Bucks, and right now that projects to be a top 5 pick. It's not guaranteed to be one, but it's projected to be one. And if you have a top 4 or 5 pick, that player makes like 8 figures as a rookie, and that goes on your books. So I would say project $10+ million for planning purposes for that pick. And then they have another first-round pick, whether it's their own or the Spurs or the Cavs, complicated swaps, all that stuff, but they're going to have 2 first-round picks this year. And we'll call that a $4 million hold, something like that. So we'll say $15 million with 2 rookies. Add that on to what I just said before with 121.8. You're at like $137 million for 11 spots, 9 players, and then 2 first-round draft picks. That's still like $29 or $30 million in salary cap room. So if you don't bring back Porzingis, McCollum, Kennard, any of them, you would have not a max slot, but a number that you could actually do something with, $30 million under the salary cap for next year. I would say almost more importantly, it's $60+ million in space below the tax line, which means you could probably bring back Porzingis and McCollum and maybe even use the mid-level on top of that. I think if you're looking at a small bright spot of Porzingis being out so much this year, is that his market almost certainly would be a lot lower than it would have been. Like, for example, he's making $30 million this year. If you poll the league right now and said, who wants to give him $30 million from next year? I don't think a lot of hands will go up. So that number's probably going to come down a little bit. Same with McCollum. He's probably like a $15 million player at this point in time, something like that. So regardless, that's more likely. We'll save a lot of this deep dive stuff for later. But the Hawks, the big picture point is the Hawks do have flexibility. They have a lot of room for next year. But I got a question about this today as well. It's basically like, okay, what happens with KP? What happens with McCollum? And my answer is TBD. Now, it'd be better radio, better video on YouTube for me to be able to tell you what's going to happen with those guys, but I'd be lying to you, and I don't like to lie. I don't like to overstate what I know when I don't know. Like, for example, I got a question today from Owl on Twitter who says, how likely do you think that the Hawks are to sign McCollum to an extension? And the answer is they could. There was some buzz around the trade with Trey and the Wizards that CJ McCollum wants an extension. He wanted one from Washington as well. This is someone who has extremely documented experience at the highest levels of Players Association. For example, he likes to be locked up and have a safe contract and be ready to go. He knows how to operate in this space, for example. The question is, like, how much do the Hawks want to keep McCollum? And for me, if I'm Ansi, and knowing Ansi a little bit, I don't know why you do that now. I mean, he could be extension eligible at any point this season, which does matter. But why would you do that now? When you want to learn what he looks like in a Hawks uniform? And look, he's like, you're not going to pay him what he's making now. That'd be crazy. But yeah, maybe there's a deal out there for him to make $15 million a year instead of $30 million a year. That would be different and be much more palatable. But even in his first 5 games with the Hawks, the first 3 games the Hawks played with McCollum, they went 0-3, and the offense was terrible with McCollum. He was shooting too much. It was clunky. I said this before the trade even was consummated or was finalized. I was like, look, making a trade on the fly with like real guys who have the ball in their hands, it's hard. There's chemistry aspects. There's like, guys knowing what they're supposed to be, what to run. And McCollum came in and was a little bit too shot happy, ball stoppy, etc. But in the last 2 games, he's played a lot better on offense. I know he had the big miss or mistake at the end of the game on Monday, but he played well in that game. He played well on Wednesday. And the offense, by the way, has a 128 offensive rating with McCollum on the floor in those 2 games. So tiny sample sizes on both sides. But like, it can work with McCollum. He has flaws for sure. The passing is not what you want it to be for a lead guard. Defensively, he's a little bit shaky, to say the least, but he can shoot. He can get his own shot. He's a veteran. He is not quite as bad of a defender that Trae Young was, for example. He's on the older side, so you want to be careful with the amount of years. But to answer the question, like, how likely is it? I think it's like moderately likely, like somewhat likely, but I think I would wait. And I think lots probably would agree with me on that, because you don't want to do something that's hasty without knowing what your options are going to be. So like for me, extending him before the deadline would be a mistake. At least when the deadline's passed, you know what you're going to have going into the summer on your roster to some degree. And that's an open question. The other part of that's Porzingis, who, as I've said before many times, is eligible for an extension right now that you can't give him because he hasn't been playing. But there is a world, I know Hawks fans are going to roll their eyes, where KP comes back and plays, 2/3 of the games the rest of the season, looks really good and helps the team because, spoiler alert, they've been good when he's played. He hasn't played very much, 17 games. I get all that. Trust me, I understand. It would have been a mistake to project Porzingis to play a ton of games this year. I said that all summer long. He's averaged 50 games per season for 10 years. So that was the projection that I had in my head. Now, he's not going to probably get to that this year, which is unfortunate for the Hawks. But like when he's been able to play, he's been good. So there's a lot of uncertainty with McCollum and with Porzingis, but those guys can play. They can help you. And there is a world in which the Hawks look up in June and are like, hey, we should probably re-sign these guys because they helped us. We got hot or whatever, and we'll see. But the as far as how likely it is, it's possible, but not something I'm like rushing out to go ahead and say the Hawks are definitely going to do at this point. From here, what I would say is there's all kinds of things the Hawks can do on the trade market. I'll answer one more question about a player now. Jake asks, could the Hawks go after Ivica Zubac from the Clippers? And whether the centers would make sense for the Hawks? Now, I'll be fast on this. If there's a rumor on Zubac, I will talk about it, but there hasn't been one. And the Clippers got red hot after their terrible start. They're 13-3 in their last 16 games, for example. And LA has been telling teams that they're not going to trade Zubac. If he is available, I would love to get it on Zubac. He's a 16-12 averaging player for the last 2 years. Last year was awesome. This year he's just been good, not awesome, but still very good player. Clearly a starter in the NBA. If you could have Zubac and Okongwu as your 2 centers, you would be living large. Awesome combination. Okongwu play a little bit next to it if you wanted to. Like there's great flexibility there. And importantly, Zubac makes about $20 million a year for 2 more years after this, which is a huge, huge value on his current contract. So could the Hawks do that? 100%. They could. Will they be able to? Probably not, but we'll see. But Jake also asked whether centers might be available and make sense. I've been saying this a lot. I did a segment last week about Daniel Gafford on this podcast when they came up with a little bit of interest on the Hawks side. My point has been and will continue to be, they don't have to have a big ticket center this year when they have KP on the roster. But long term, as soon as next season, Okongwu can't be your only center. I like Okongwu probably more than most do, but he is a tandem center. If he's your 1A to a 1B or 1B to a 1A, you're in good shape. If he is clearly your best center, you are looking for another center, probably. So that's the case for like everyone but like 10 guys in the league. Zubac is in that top 10, which is why he's a rarefied air player. But like Daniel Gafford is a 1B or a 1A to a 1B. He's a guy that Hawks could trade for sure. Like people ask about Nick Claxton. Last year I was like firmly out of Nick Claxton. He was not playing well at all. This year he's been better. He still makes a lot of money for what he actually is, but it's at least reasonable. And because Okongwu makes so little money, it's more palatable. So sure, that's an interesting name to at least keep an eye on. There are expiring guys. Nikola Vucevic is expiring. Robert Williams is expiring in Portland. Nick Richards is kind of the cheaper version of that for $5 million. Like there are different names to look at, but it remains to be seen how urgent that actually is because Christian Koloko isn't like a great player, but he looked decent on Wednesday. He's been an NBA center. And if the Hawks believe, and that's a big if the Hawks think that Porzingis can help them this year at some point, trading real stuff for a center right now is like a lot harder to do because suddenly you have 3 centers, which isn't terrible, but you're going to have 3 than 1, but there's asset allocation questions there. So hopefully that's the question. Activity level, like what they're looking for on the trade market. The biggest thing they need right now is center help, but maybe Koloko can help you with that for a few weeks. And the big question is, what do the Hawks get from Ricochet and Porzingis? And in a second, I'll answer a question about Jalen Johnson that is directly related to the absences of Ricochet and Porzingis. We'll get into all of that, plus a preview of Hawks, Suns, and more in just one moment. New year, new systems. This is the time of year where a lot of us actually look at the best parts of how we run our businesses and think there just has to be a better way to do this, and now there actually is. If you want your communication streamlined, it's one of the quickest ways to upgrades that you can actually make to your business. And that's why today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at Quo, spelled Q-U-O, the smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is actually reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you are not only working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with your customers. And at Quo, they make everything super simple for you. The entire team can actually call and text from one shared business number, so there's no missing anything whatsoever. Everyone sees the full thread. That makes replies faster and more personal. It works from your phone or your computer at the same time. You can even keep your existing number if you prefer to, and they have smart AI tools. They can log calls and summarize them, highlight next steps, and much more, so you actually have all the details in one spot. It's no surprise at all, Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2. Trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away from you. And try Quo for free and get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnba. That's QUO.com/lockedonnba. Quo. No missed calls, no missed customers. All right, so I said before I would relate this question to the absences of Porzingis and Ricochet. And as a reminder, the Hawks said Monday, both those players will be reevaluated in a week. So we're talking about 3 or 4 days from now at this point. The question from David is, what is stopping the Hawks from playing Jalen at the 3 while Ricochet is out? Great question, David. And I mentioned before, this is a nuanced answer, so hold on tight. I believe, and I know the Hawks believe, Jalen Johnson is primarily a power forward. That's first and foremost. I've used this stat before, but in his professional career, he has played less than 3% of his minutes at small forward. He has played as much, or maybe even more than as much, center in his pro career than he's played at the 3. That's all true. Now, he actually can play small forward. That's nuanced, but like he is a power forward in my opinion. He can play small forward. That is important context. Now, I'm glad the question included Ricochet being out because I've been banging this drum for a while. Ricochet is the only small forward on the roster, and he's not playing right now. That leads to some uncomfortable lineups. A lot of 3-guard lineups, a lot of 2 small lineups, and that kind of leans into Quinn's worst impulses, I think. And then without Porzingis, you are down a center, a really good center, and you're down an offensive hub. That hurts things as well. Plus, a rim protector. Because while KP is limited defensively, he is a really good, proven, historically rim protector. So what about this has to do with Jalen playing the 3? Well, I think the Hawks should have already and still could and should try Jalen at the 3 sometimes and in certain lineups. I would not transition Jalen to the full-time 3. Like even today, I got a question about this. Hey, long-term, can Jalen play the 3 full-time and Okongwu play the 4 full-time? No, is the answer to the question for me. Now, can they both play those spots? Yes. We've already seen Okongwu play the 4 this year with Porzingis. That makes sense. He can do that. Jalen can play the 3. He's done a little bit this year, not very much. But I would prioritize trying Jalen at the 3 some in certain matchups because of the fact that the reality is what you're choosing between in those instances is Jalen playing the 3, which means playing more of Moget, more of Asanul, more of Christian Koloko. Or you're playing Jalen at the 4 only, which leads you to playing more of Vit Krejci, more of Corey Kispert, more of Luke Kennard, and more generally 2 small lineups because that also leads to more McCollum, all of that. So this is the short version of the answer is the Hawks should try to play a little bit bigger, I think. And one way to do that is Jalen at the 3. Now, my real pushback to myself there would be that Jalen's currently playing like 36 minutes a game of power forward only. So if you take him away from that and put him more at the 3, you're playing guys who are not as good as he is at the 4 more. More of Mo, more of Asa. Not ideal. And Rishi is the only other guy on the team who can play the 3 and the 4, and he's not available right now. So with Zach out, I'd like to play Jalen at the 3 some. It is harder to do that, however, without Porzingis because you're down a big. And Porzingis is an offensively gifted big. The biggest question, this is always a misconception. The question about playing Jalen or anybody that's bigger at a smaller spot is not the offense. Sorry, it's not the defense, it's the offense. Jalen can play the 3 on offense. He can. But the problem is, if you're playing him with like Mo Gay and Christian Koloko, that's not going to work. You need to have some offensive skill at the 4 and the 5 to help him in that spot. Same thing is like if you're trying to play Jalen at the 3 with Dyson and a big, that's not going to be great for your spacing. So you got to be intentional if you're going to do that. Like, for instance, playing Jalen at the 3 with McCollum and Nikhil, or with, Nikhil and Kennard. So enough shooting on the perimeter, plus at least one of Okongwu and Newell for spacing. Yeah, try that. Why not try it? So what's stopping the Hawks? The fact that he's probably the 4 is number 1. Number 2 is that Quinn tends to lean offense and to lean small. And number 3 is if you play him at the 3, there's more minutes that have to be filled at the 4. And the Hawks like their options in the front court. Ansi in the front office in particular, like Asa, bright future. I feel like I'm being painted in some circles as like being anti-Asa. I'm definitely not. I like Asa. I think Asa's come a long way already. He is ahead of schedule as a rookie big. His offense in particular is polished. He plays hard. I really like Asa Newell. I really do. The only thing is he can't play center defensively right now. And that leads you to some questions where it's like, hey, if we have Jalen already playing the 4 only, which he has been lately and really all season long for the most part, like you can't really play Asa a lot because that's just, unless you just don't play Mogay. And Mogay, for better or worse, I think the Hawks probably trust more because of defense. So long story long, I believe the Hawks should try Jalen at the 3 in some targeted lineups. And part of that is because of how small they are playing. I would be trying to more actively avoid those 3-guard looks. There's just too many times this year where the Hawks are playing a quote-unquote wing combination of like Kennard and Krejci, or Kennard and Kispert, or Krejci and Kispert. Like that shouldn't be happening, especially with McCollum, who's also a bad defender. Like you got to stop doing that, and that leads to some bad situations. When the Hawks have size, physicality, they play much better defense. And if Jalen has to play the 3 to do some of that stuff, you can go ahead and do it. We saw on Monday against Milwaukee. Like you don't have to have a traditional 3 on the court. Milwaukee plays big a lot. That's one example. But Jalen can be someone who is a 4 in my view, and still be someone who can play some 3 for you. That's where I'll leave it for now. That's a short version. I could probably do a whole show on that, but I won't. Last thing before we get out of here, a quick preview of Friday night's game between the Hawks and the Suns. Atlanta is back at home against Phoenix. Look, the Suns are one of the best, like in a positive direction, surprises in the whole league this year. They started the season 1-4. I was like, all right, it's the Suns. Are going to be the Suns. They are 26-13 since then, including 12-4 in the last 16 games. The Phoenix Suns are currently, as I'm recording this podcast on Thursday night, in a tie for 5th in the West and a half game out of 4th. That's crazy for where they were supposed to be. So kudos to them. Jordan Ott, former Hawks adjacent coach, deep in the bench, all that stuff. They have a good defense, which is the most shocking part. Top 5 or 6 in the league on defense this year. The biggest thing matchup-wise is the Hawks have to protect the ball. The Suns are elite this season at creating turnovers. And the Hawks have to take care of the ball big time in this matchup. And Phoenix also has done a really good job preventing 3-point attempts, which the Hawks wanted to create. So a couple of head-to-head matchups there. Can you protect the ball, and can you create threes? Those are questions the Hawks have to answer in this game on Friday. Notably, it's the last game of a long trip for Phoenix. That is, if you follow my work closely, good news for the Hawks. Teams always hate, coaches hate this, players hate this. The last game of a long road trip, and the first game at home are really hard, and they could be tired at this point in time. Plus, they've been in Atlanta for a couple days, and that sometimes can help the Hawks if the home team has been enjoying the Atlanta life a little bit the last 2 days. We'll see if that happens or not. But a winnable game for the Hawks, even though the Suns are better than the Hawks right now. They're playing better than the Hawks are, better record, all that stuff. But Hawks are back at home, decent spot. Injury-wise, no KP, no Rishi still. They could be back as soon as Monday. We'll see. The Hawks did recall Asa Newell from the G League after the game last night. We'll see if he plays at all on Friday. And Phoenix has a totally clean injury report, which is kind of wild in January. But here we are. Last thing, Our friends at FanDuel have the Hawks as a 3-point underdog as of Thursday night. So that means the Hawks are not favored to win the game, even at home. And that's not surprising. Phoenix have been playing better than the Hawks are. But it's a game where the Hawks could kind of not steal one. Like, it wouldn't be a big upset if the Hawks were to win. But it would be a nice one to get if you were the Hawks. Because after that, you have Indiana at home on Monday. And there's nothing guaranteed at all in the NBA. But Indiana is pretty bad. And that's a home game on full rest. So if you can get this one on Friday, there's a chance for a winning streak. And that'd be really helpful for the Hawks. So stay tuned. As I always would, I'll break down the game after the game on Friday. I will be in the building for that one, so stay tuned for that. And please subscribe to the podcast. If you are new to the podcast, thanks for joining us today. Just search Locked On Hawks anywhere on your platforms, whether it be Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. We are all over the place, so please subscribe and tell your friends about the pod. Like, comment, ratings, reviews, all that fun stuff. Follow the show on X/Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland, as well as on Blue Sky at BT Rowland. And also follow my non-podcast coverage of the Hawks at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Everybody, enjoy your Thursday evening into Friday, and we'll see you in about 24 hours after the Hawks take on the Suns.